Thank you for listening to Discovering the Scriptures. Currently, we're in Daniel chapter 8. We're going to be looking at verses 5 through 7. That's the paragraph. Let me read it in the King James Bible. Quote, "And as I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a noticeable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand." Unquote. I see in this section there's a lot of symbolism going on. So this is prophecy that was fulfilled 200 years later, as has been noted by Alexander the Great. So let's see how these three verses touch together. We're going to look at John Gill's commentary. I'm going to read it for you because he uses all the old commentaries. "And as I was considering the ram, and the strange things done by him, wondering that a creature of so little strength, comparatively with other beasts, should be able to do such exploits, and thinking with himself what should be the meaning of all this, and what would be the issue of it, behold, a he-goat came from the west, which is interpreted of the king or kingdom of Grecia, which lay to the west of Persia. And a kingdom may be said to do what one of its kings did, particularly Alexander, king of Macedon in Greece, who, with the Grecian army under him, marched from thence to fight the king of Persia, and which might be signified by a, quote, he-goat, unquote, because of its strength, its comeliness in walking, and its being the guide and leader of the flock. And also it is remarkable that the arms of Macedon, or the ensigns carried before their armies, were a goat, ever since the days of Caranus, that's Caranus, who, following a flock of goats, was directed to Edessus, that's Edessa, a city of Macedon, and took it, and from this circumstance of the goats called it Aegean, and the people Aegeantes, which signifies goats, and put the goat in his arms. On the face of the whole earth, all that lay between Grecia and Persia, all Asia, yea, all the whole world, at least as Alexander thought, who wept because there was not another world to conquer. Hence, Juvenal says, one world was not enough for this young man, and touched not the ground as he went. He seemed rather to fly in the air than to walk upon the earth. With such swiftness did Alexander run over the world and make his conquests. In 6 or 8 years' time he conquered the kingdom of the Medes and Persians, Babylon, Egypt, and all the neighboring nations, and afar off Greece, Ilium, and the greatest part of the then known world. Hence the third or Grecian monarchs under him is said to be like a leopard, with 4 wings of a fowl on its back. He conquered countries as soon almost as another could have traveled over them. In his marches he was swift and undefeatable. Agnias reports that he marched clad in armor, thrice 400, that is 1,200 furlongs, upon a stretch, and before his army could take any rest, fought his enemies and conquered them. Some rendered the words, whom no man touched in the earth, that is, none could oppose, resist, and stop him. He bore down and carried all before him. There was no coming at him so as to touch him or hurt him. He was so swift in his motions and so powerful in his army. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes, or horn of vision, as it is interpreted. He is the first king of Greece, that is, when it became a monarch, who was Alexander the Great, and verily properly called a horn, being possessed of great power and authority, and a notable one, very remarkable, and he had the wisdom of ages to come, since the horn of a vision, as it may be rendered, is most visible and conspicuous one, to be seen afar off, and which attracted the eyes of all unto it. Alexander, in his armor, is said to have had goat's horns on his helmet, upon the top of his crest, and to such insignias is the allusion here. And Alexander came to the ram that had two horns, as we see in verse 6, being chosen and made by the states of Greece, captain general of all Greece against the Persian, marched from thence with his army, passed the Hellespont, and entered into the kingdom of the Medes and Persians, signified by the ram with two horns, and came up to Darius, possessed of his large monarch, and at the head of a numerous army, which I had seen standing before the river Ulas, near Shushan, the royal seat of the kings of Persia, where Darius stood in his royal majesty and dignity, as the defender of his empire, and unconcerned at the attempt of Alexander, having nothing to fear, as he thought, from such a puny adversary. And he ran unto him in the fury of his power, or heat of his power, which denotes the haste Alexander made with his army into Asia, his eager desire and fever of his mind to engage with the Persians. The historian says that he passed the Hellespont in Asia, fired with incredible ardor of mind, and a little after having conquered the rebels of Pisidia, that's Pisida, he marched against Darius with the greatest ardor of mind and with no less alacrity, which exactly agrees with the sacred text. The running of the he-goat to the ram in a hostile way is described in allusion to the manner of those creatures when they fight one another or attack an enemy. Now, a footnote to this from Dr. Peter John. I just went onto YouTube and watched a ram and a he-goat go battle and headbutt each other. And it's amazing. I thought for sure that the ram was going to be a much bigger animal, because I only know them from what I've seen, but not in real life. So I always figured they were going to be a much bigger animal. And I looked at these two, and I'm like, okay, either one could win. Either one could win. But I'm not an expert on both these animals, or even singularly, because we didn't raise any of these when I was growing up. But I was watching these two, and I was like, okay, this could actually be something that took place. This is not something strange. Let's continue on with John Gill in verse 7. And I saw him come close unto the ram, though the distance between Grecia and Persia was very great, and many rivers and mountains in the way, it seemed impassable. Alexander got over them all and came up to Darius and fought several battles with him and entirely defeated him, though greatly inferior in number to him, as follows. Now I'm going to do another footnote here. I want you to remember that when these guys, and even in modern warfare, are going these great distances, they have to set up a line of supplies, food, clothing, everything, from where they're at to where they're going. And this has got to be one that has to be managed. The food has to be shipped off at appropriate time to get where it needs to go, so that they're always having the supplies they need. Now, as they're conquering cities, they can take things there. But if you don't have enough, what do you have? So Alexander did more than just conquer. He had to go ahead and find the men, or himself, but more than likely find the men who could go ahead and set these managerial skills up and carry them through, as he went ahead and inspired them, motivated them, the managers of the men, for the supply chain. And he also had to motivate his armies to do all this traveling and fight, sometimes in the same day frame. How is this all done? Well, I can tell you right now, from what I understand of God, This has to be all blessed by God. These nations have had so many sins that they've committed that it is now required that they be conquered. As we read in the Old Testament, this has happened many times. That God has not let the nation get touched until their sins are too many, if they pursue that way. Let's go ahead and continue on with John Gill. And he was moved with choler against them, extremely embittered against him. That's what it means. Exasperated and provoked to the last degree by the proud and scornful message he sent him, calling him King of Kings and akin to the gods. And Alexander his servant ordered his nobles to take Philip's maddening stripling, as he called him in contempt, and whip him with children's rods, and clothe him in purple, and deliver him bound to him. Then sink his ships with the mariners, and transport all his soldiers to the furthest part of the Red Sea. And smote the ram in 3 battles, in each of which the Persians were smitten and routed by the Grecians. First at the river Ganges, that's Granicus, where Alexander with 30,000 foot and 5,000 horse met the Persians, though more than five times his number, being, as Justin says, 600,000, and got the victory over them. Here 20,000 of the Persian footmen and 250 of their horses were slain, and not more than 39 of the Macedonians killed. Plutarch, who John Gill is quoting, who was alive from 46 to 140 AD, says, it was reported that the Persians lost 20,000 footmen and 2,500 horse. And Aristobulus, he says that the Macedonians lost only 34 men, of which 12 were footmen. And Dionysius relates that the Persians lost more than 10,000 footmen, and not less than 2,000 horse, and more than 20,000 were taken, according to Justin. Of Alexander's army, there only fell 9 footmen and 120 horsemen. Others say that of the Macedonians, 25 men of Alexander's own troop fell in the first attack, another 60 over other of the horsemen were killed, and 30 of the footmen. So different are the accounts of the slain. In this battle, however, the victory appears to be very great, whereby Sardius, of all Darius's rich furniture, fell into the hands of Alexander, and all the provinces of the Lesser Asia submitted to him. The next battle was fought at Iscus, its Cilicia, where Darius had an army, according to Plutarch, consisting of 600,000 men, according to Justin, 400,000 footmen and 100,000 horsemen, which were routed by Alexander when 100,000 of the Persian footmen and 10,000 of the horsemen were slain. And only on Alexander's side 504 of the footmen wounded, 32 wanting, and 150 of the horsemen killed. Here also the accounts vary. Plutarch says above 110,000 of the Persians were slain, according to Diodius Silicus, where there fell of them 120,000 footmen and not less than 10,000 horsemen, and of the Macedonians 300 footmen and about 150 horsemen, according to RM. The Persian lost 10,000 horsemen and 90,000 footmen. According to Justin, 61,000 footmen and 10,000 horsemen were slain, and 40,000 taken. And of the Macedonians there fell 130 footmen and 150 horsemen. But, be it as it will, the victory was exceedingly great, whereby the camp of Darius, his mother, wife, and children, and all his riches at Damascus, fell into the hands of Alexander with all Syria. The third and last battle was fought near Arbela, or rather in Assyrium, when Alexander with 50,000 men beat Darius with an army of 1,100,000 men. Plutarch says 10,000, 40,000 of which were slain, and the Macedonians only 300 or less were wanting. According to Ariam, 30,000 were slain. And the account goes on. And break his two horns, according to the Medes and Persians, and the two kingdoms united in one monarch, but now destroyed. Another monarch, the Grecians, took its place. And there was no power of the ram to stand before him. There was no strength in Timhol's empire significant to resist, oppose, and stop him. Those vast armies were collected together. These were soon broken and rooted, and Darius at the head of them was forced to fly and make his escape in the best manner he could. But he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him. Not Darius personally, for he was slain by Beatrice, one of his own captains, but the Persian empire had ceased to be, and was no longer in the hands of the Persians, but was taken by them by Alexander. And all the glory and majesty of it were defaced and despised. The famous city and the palace were burned in a drunken fit, and at the instigation of a harlot. And there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand, not his armies, nor his generals, nor his allies, nor his offers to Alexander of his daughter in marriage. And part of his kingdom, all were in vain, and to no purpose. He and his whole empire fell into the conqueror's hands, and there was no remedy against him. The Jewish historians said that when Alexander was on his way to Jerusalem, Jadias, the high priest, met and accompanied him into the city and the temple, and showed him this prophecy of Daniel, that some one of the Grecians should abolish the empire of the Persians, and thinking himself to be intended, was greatly pleased. Gorion says the high priest, whom he calls Ananias, that's Ananias, said to Alexander, showing him the prophecy, Thou art this he-goat, and Darius is the ram, and thou shalt trample him to the ground, and take the kingdom out of his hand. And he greatly strengthened the heart of the king. That ends John Gill. Now, why did I read all of these people who were reporting the battles and all this? Because I wanted to show you the validity of how far back John Gill goes in his commentary. He goes back almost 1,800 years and quotes sources. And so I wanted to quote those to you today to show you, in fact, how far it goes and who he uses, and to show the validity of his commentary. Now, we want to look at these paragraph here. We want to look and see how is Daniel writing this. We know he's writing in the Hebrew language. But how is he writing this? Well, he's contemplating on this, because before he had the vision of the end times, the day of judgment, which was so horrific, it changed the countenance of his look to everyone. And so he had that 2 years before this one, in Belshazzar's rule. And now he has this vision going on. So as we look at the Hebrew, we notice that he's writing this very passively. He's considering it, but he's writing it passively. He's doing his duty. He himself is writing this down. Not another scribe. It's all done as he is doing this. So he is writing this. He is doing what he's told to do. This prophecy gives validity to Daniel, and that God uses him, and that he's not a false prophet, which means that the prophecies that we have in the end times are able to be trusted. Now, as we go through section by section, we're going to look at the paragraphs. We're going to read the old commentaries. We're going to study them. We're going to look at the original language. We're not going to go verse by verse by verse. We're going to consider them in sections. And then we're going to go ahead and go through those sections in detail. We will get understanding more of this, the ram and the he-goat, as we go along. But you have to stay tuned, because it's later on in this chapter. I want to thank you for participating with Discovering the Scriptures. Please keep me in your prayers as I endeavor to seek God's counsel and wisdom as we go forward to cover the entire Bible, verse by verse, in sections now, so that we have this in a clear understanding. Remember to meditate upon the Word, and when you're looking at Scripture, compare it. When you're looking at difficult words, which I did, I looked it over to see, does Daniel have any other meanings behind some of these words, to which I found none, or I would have brought them to you. Now, if you want to hear more about this, go ahead and go down below and hit the subscribe button and the bell button. And I like to give credit where credit is due, and I've done that till now. I want to thank one of my listeners. His name is Don from Detroit, Michigan. And he said, listen, when I look at people's stuff on YouTube, I like to support them. By doing so, while I'm on their channel, I'll go and hit one of their ads that come up, because I know that the advertisers have to pay them something for when I do so. And this is my way of contributing to what they're doing, because I like what I'm watching. And that's something you might want to pass on and do yourself. If you like something on a person's channel, click on the ad deliberately, because in that way they'll make a stipend from the advertisement, which is true. I make between $300 to $400 a month on stipends from the advertisers. And if you would like to support my channel, you can do one of three ways. You either hit those advertisers that are on the channel here, or go down below and purchase one of the apparels. I get $5 for each one that you do, so that does help. I do want you to know that in the almost 14 years that I've been doing ministries online, I have only received a $200 gift from one person who sent it to me from my one ministry, and that's it. Surprisingly so. I always thought that people who had ministries online were just raking in donations. Well, if they do, I don't know about it. So thank you for your prayers. Please keep me in your prayers as we continue on through the Bible. God bless.